You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Welcome to the 602 Club, Trek FM's local watering hole, and I am just one of your hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and with me, as she is every single week, sister of the sisterhood, Christy Morris.
Well, hello. Thank you so much for that warm introduction, and man, I am here and ready to kick some butt and use some sign language.
Excellent. I'm glad you did not use the voice on me. I appreciate that. I find that to be kind of rude when you do that.
That's only reserved for the most extreme circumstances when, someone's got to put you in your place.
Okay. Oh, good to know. Well, we're really excited tonight because one of the biggest movies of the year has finally been released, and we are going to be talking about Villeneuve's Dune, which I'm super excited to get to. I've been waiting for this movie for a long time, especially since it was supposed to come out last year, and I had started rereading the books and all, and oh my gosh. Anyway, before we get to all of that, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts, so please make sure you're subscribed wherever that is. And if you would give us a star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, we'd be really excited for that. We still get so many of our listeners from the Apple Podcast system, and so by giving us a star rating review, it does help the show grow. It helps people find the show when they're searching for shows there and new podcasts. Of course, you could find us on Twitter at the 602 Club. We're on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. And in fact, Christy, we had done a little contest there for people following us. And so I went through all of the new followers there. We want to say thank you to all of them, but I chose a winner for their opportunity to choose any MCU movie they'd like digitally. And so Russ, it's at RussM33. Just contact us there on Twitter, and I will make sure that you can get your copy of any MCU movie of your choice digitally. I'll send that to you. So thank you so much for following us, everybody. We really appreciate it. We are, Christy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're over 250 followers now.
On Twitter?
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Oh my God, that's awesome.
Yeah, so cool. So we really do appreciate it. And hey, if you're not following us, please go over there and follow us. We've got some great stuff coming to you all the time. We're always talking nerd news and things over there on the 602 Club on Twitter. And of course, again, you could find us on Instagram at 602 Club TFM. You can also find us on Facebook with the entire network over at facebook.com/TrekFM. And then there is the listeners-only discussion group where fans from all over the world can talk about the shows together. You can just find that on Facebook by typing in Babel Conference, and you'll find the group. And of course, you can go over to the website at trek.fm, and you'll see all of the shows we're doing. We've got some great stuff coming out these days. And of course, the 602 Club, and you can go to the contact section if you would like to send Christy and I an email. So, Christy, I'm wondering, as we come into this movie, obviously, there's been previous adaptations that this comes from a famous book series, and so I'm wondering what your Dune history is.
Well, people might be shocked, and I hope won't revoke my geek card, but I had heard about the books and the previous movie from '84 and the limited series on TV, but never actually consumed any Dune content until this movie.
Wow.
So, yeah. Don't know how I missed it, but no, I do know how. I will tell you, way back when I was watching Sci-Fi Channel in the 90s and 2000s with my dad, of course, I remember seeing the commercials for the Sci-Fi Channel series of Dune and thinking every time that it was referenced that it felt so huge and epic that it was too much. And so that's why I didn't attempt to get into it. But that's probably the way a lot of people feel about Star Wars.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. Dune is definitely a very expansive thing. I mean, you not only have Frank Hebert's original books, which he has Dune plus his 5 sequels to it. Then you also have his son, as well as Kevin J. Anderson, have written quite extensively in the Dune universe. They did the sequels off of his notes, as well as prequel books and books in between different parts of the series. So, I mean, it is huge. And honestly, it's funny, and I don't think it's all that strange because, I didn't read Dune until 2015 as of getting ready for a podcast crossover that we did here with the 602 Club. We did with Educating Geeks, and then the 602 Club got together, and on Educating Geeks, we talked about the book together. And then they came over here, and we talked about the movie. And so that was back on episode 66, Spice Trip on the Sloop John B. And my first experience with the book was fantastic. I really fell in love with the book, and not so much the 1984 movie. That was really not my, honestly, as, Austin Powers would say, that just wasn't my bag. And so, but I loved the book. And so I ended up, as the movie was going to come out last year, I decided that I would read all of his books that he had written. And so I went through his original Dune novel as well as the rest of his sequels, and then I ended up reading the 2 books that Kevin J. Anderson and Brian Hebert wrote to complete the series off his father's notes. And then I've just been going through this year as well, reading the prequel books. So I've been immersed in this world of Dune, and I've really been enjoying it. Now, I've never seen any of the miniseries that were done on the Sci-Fi Channel. I did not get a chance to see those, mainly because they're not easy to get a hold of these days. You'd have to buy them on disc.
Yeah, not now.
Yeah. And so not really a good place to be able to see those, so I've not seen those versions, but I was obviously very much looking forward to the moment that I heard that Denis Villeneuve was going to be doing this. I loved his Blade Runner 2049. It's a masterpiece in filmmaking, and I could not think of anybody better, honestly, to do this, so I was very excited. Now, that's a question that I'm really interested, since you really weren't super familiar with the world of Dune, and you hadn't really watched anything else. Were you excited when you saw the trailers and the previews for this?
I think it was curiosity more than anything. Definitely wanting to see something more condensed than starting off straight away with all the books, because that did feel so overwhelming. But then knowing, from also experience on my own as well, that books developed into film don't always translate. So I was a little apprehensive in that sense, but you probably were especially so, as I'm sure a lot of people were that had been fans of the books for so long. But yeah, I was curious, and it looked like it was going to be very artistic. And it's actually kind of funny that I also ended up finding out that Villeneuve did Blade Runner 2049, because the other day when someone asked me what I thought of this movie, I said it feels very similar to Blade Runner, like an art film kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and on that too, I mean, one of the big parts of this movie is that he's decided to adapt it into 2 parts. And so did you know that coming in, or was that a surprise when you sat down to watch the movie and it said Dune Part 1?
It was a surprise. I didn't know it before I saw the movie. Did you?
I did know that coming in because, I'd been kind of keeping up with that whole the whole behind the scenes stuff going on with the film. And I think it was really smart. I mean, obviously he was very keen on this idea because it's just way too complex to do in one movie and do it justice. And I mean, in all honesty, you would have to basically do a 4-hour movie. And, that just doesn't work. And so this way, I think you can really do the film justice. And I mean, there's still things that they're going to have to cut out. In fact, one of the biggest things about this is that this movie, one of the focuses they gave it so they could help kind of streamline things as much as possible was really to focus on the story of Paul and Jessica, even kind of creating some things that aren't in the book, like giving their own secret hand gesture language where they can kind of communicate silently with one another. And I mean, the movie really does focus on them as characters. And I think in a way that helps kind of make it their journey that we're following. Obviously Paul is kind of the main character who we're following, but Jessica we're also following very much as well. So, I think to me it was like, it just like with adapting any book series, especially like Harry Potter or whatever, as you're reading those books, you have to figure out, okay, so what is the viewpoint to which I'm going to try and tell this story so that it allows you to shape everything else about the film around that. And so I think it worked pretty well. Now, you coming in, obviously you don't have a familiarity with the books, but did that work for you here as you were just coming in, clean slate with the movie?
Yes, actually, it definitely did, because that's something that you and I have talked about before can hurt a movie is when you have too many different directions that the film is going in and it doesn't feel like there's a core story driving everything. You end up losing people. And that's something I'd heard as a complaint about the past adaptations of this into film or TV was that it was still just so much exposition and so many different things going on that they're trying to cram into something that people get overwhelmed and there's no real story to follow, as well as it is in the books. So yeah, I think that was a vital thing for making this, especially down to 2 parts, and made this feel like a cohesive story.
Nice.
For me.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably exactly what he's going for, and so I think that's fantastic. Now, obviously, too, one of the big parts in adapting this is that all of the aspects around what's happening with the emperor and the politics involved with the empire, they do minimize that here in the movie, even though it's still there. Did you feel like that you were understanding kind of the political ramifications of what's going on here well enough so you felt comfortable to just kind of get what's going on? Yeah. I think that they boiled it down to, okay, what's the big thing going on with the emperor? And that you get right away that they're saying the emperor really rules over every planet, basically, and they all recognize him as supreme authority. But also there's these individual houses, kind of like tribes or something, that report to him. And then you find out, sort of like you're a bystander, that the emperor has taken aside and was basically just tricking House Atreides into being killed off. So I thought that came across really well here. And I think that it was wise of them to cut anything that was kind of superfluous in this approach. Yeah, I agree with you. I think, and part of this too is I did see the movie a few times this weekend. One, just because, spoiler alert, I was enjoying it, and I've been waiting so long to see it. But two, I feel like a movie of this size and this magnitude, really, I think it does need to be seen a few times, just so you can just really let it sink in, and sit with it, and so I think I was really impressed with the way that they handled this because there are a lot of politics involved. In many ways, you can absolutely see where, George Lucas took inspiration for the prequels of Star Wars, because there are a lot of politics involved with these different houses. Right. In some ways, you can almost see some inspiration. And I think maybe this might have helped you. You've seen Game of Thrones. So, having those different houses in Game of Thrones, and I think the politics there work similar to this as well, like where you have these great houses that are all vying for power and everything, and you have some that are more honorable than others. And so I think all of that works. And I think to put that through the context and the lens of Paul's coming-of-age story, I think it really works, that all of these forces are kind of working against each other, but in this, it's really about this boy becoming a man and his place in the universe, which could be immense, by the time we're done with the story. And so I 100% agree with that. The one aspect I'll say with it in this adaptation that I do kind of wish had been a little bit stronger, and I was really thankful that, obviously, Paul and Jessica get a lot of play in this film and are focus, obviously, but I do wish, and I feel like they could have done this in a couple of scenes, and they didn't quite get to where I wanted them to go. But one of the big story points of the series is, they don't quite explain, for somebody who hasn't read the story, exactly why Jessica and Leto aren't married, and exactly how that works with what the Bene Gesserits are doing, and what their plan is. From the movie that their plan is to create this mind that is going to bring humanity to a better place. That's their goal. But you don't learn is that Jessica was given to Leto as a concubine because of their breeding plans that have led them to this point. And she's only supposed to have daughters for him. And the reason she's a concubine, because that way, as a great lord of a house, he could get married to somebody else politically, and all those kind of things. And it's Jessica and Leto actually falling in love. Like, she falls in love with him, and therefore she gives him a son. And I wish, and that's a big part of the series, because Bene Gesserits push away love for duty instead. And it's love that leads her to give Leto a son, and that's what creates Paul. So in the end, the possibility of him being the one comes from love, not from a plan. And I think that's a really interesting storyline that I wish was there, because I think that's kind of an interesting theme to follow throughout the entire story. And it's definitely important because it also, I think, it helps bring those two characters together, in that sense. For the little amount that we would get them on screen, Leto and Jessica, I think they do a good enough job, but I just feel like that's an important story point I would have wanted to see a little more.
I'm glad you explained that, because I was unaware of that. However, I did notice that they mentioned, he says, I should have married you. And that's when I was like, oh, wait a minute. And then at one point as well, I believe it's, the head of House Harkonnen that says, or Harkonnen, whatever.
Baron Harkonnen.
He says something about your concubine.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, okay. So they weren't married. And then it was also interesting to me that isn't she called the Reverend Mother?
The main
Truth
Bene
sayer.
Gesserit is the Reverend Mother. Yeah.
Okay. So when she says you were supposed to give daughters, but from your pride decided to give a son, that part confused me, because I'm like, well, but nobody chooses the gender of their child.
Well, and that's one of the things that I guess, again, too, that's just where they could have used just a little bit more, in that if you come into this blind and don't have the knowledge of the books, which is not your fault, the movie should give this to you, the Bene Gesserit have complete control over their bodies down to the smallest like detail, and so when they get pregnant, they can choose the sex of the child. That's what allows them to control the breeding as they've been, and that's why they're set up to be given to these great houses, because they've been mixing the bloodlines for so many years trying to create this one. And so again, that's just where a little bit more explanation for people who have not been immersed in the source material, I think, is needed, and actually helps you understand the story just a little bit better. And again, you know, that scene, that may be the only scene in the movie that I don't love, because that's not exactly why Jessica, she doesn't choose this because she's trying to create the one. She chooses this because she loves Leto, and Leto desired a son.
Yeah.
You know, as is, you know, in this situation, creating a son and an heir is so important, and therefore she gives him what he desires because she loves him, not because she's anything else. And so that's probably the one place where and the only place I would ding that, honestly, this adaptation, where I'm like, that's not quite it.
It could have been a quick, you know, saying that Bene Gesserits can control their body, and, you know, then you're done with it.
Right. I mean, in that scene, you could have had the Reverend Mother say, you have the choice. You can, you know, and I would have much more appreciated if they had added, you know, the fact that because, you know, you fell in love with him, and not just that she's prideful trying to create this one.
Right. Yeah. That would have explained it better. The other thing that did confuse me, that I was curious for how it made you feel, was they did not ever actually explain where, you know, what the purpose or where the voice comes from. Just that she has taught her son their ways. And, you know, that he has this power, but it takes some training and some work to develop it the right way, and then to use it only when necessary. But they don't explain where he got it from, or, you know, other than like she trained him. But, you know, is it like a situation where anybody could learn it, or is it like a genetic predisposition?
No, it's only a Bene Gesserit trait, and it's only something that they could be taught. And therefore, because he's her son, he's inherited her powers, and and something, again, that's
so that's what they meant.
Yeah, that's very difficult with the Bene Gesserits, is that these are powers that are inherent only to women, and men who have these powers are kind of a waste to them, because they can never be awakened to become Reverend Mothers, because the process to become a Reverend Mother takes this this specific it's honestly just like this poison, basically, that kind of awakens them so that they can have they can then connect with all of the lifetimes of their previous generations' mothers. So basically all the way back, you know. So what it gives them is this incredible perspective, this incredible knowledge, this incredible understanding. It makes them incredibly good at truth saying, because they can tell if somebody's lying. Gives them these and ridiculous kind of powers, like the voice and like things like that, even more so. And no man has ever survived that. So basically what they're looking for in the one is the ability to have a man be able to go through that. And
no spoilers.
Yes. So that's that. I mean, and again, that's the thing. I mean, this is one of the things that makes the book so difficult to adapt. There's such detail in this book. It's like Lord of the Rings for science fiction, in that, and I mean that in the best possible way, in that, you know, Lord of the Rings, you know, there's plenty of things that, even as great as the movies are at 3 hours apiece, there's still plenty of things you don't get because there's just not time, to adequately explain everything and understand everything. So, I think that's just one of the places where I feel like specifically the movie probably could have done it slightly better, especially for those who, because my wife doesn't know Dune. She's never read it either. And she, even though she liked the movie, she said, there's so much here I realize I'm missing, just because as much as I'm getting, I also know that's probably like a third of it, just because there's so much else. So obviously the production design of creating this kind of world and basically a whole universe is really important. And so I wanted to hear, I'm really interested from you, who has no idea about Dune at all, how you feel about how they did with creating this world of Dune, and was it successful for you in making you feel immersed in this universe?
Yeah, it really was. Truly, I think that they get across very well with the different versions of the architecture, as well as the ships and things like that, that this is a very futuristic point in time, but that also everything still suits the environments where they are. So, definitely thinking primarily of once they get to Arrakis, it's absolutely, you can tell, built for people that are used to living and, working and everything this land all the time. And I liked that it felt like, and maybe you can tell me if the books were actually designed to be this way, but it felt like they were inspired by life in the Middle East.
Oh, yes.
And, like the Bedouins and Morocco and the Sahara
100%.
and everything out there. So, because even some of the names sound like Arab names.
Yes, absolutely. That's on purpose for sure.
So, yeah. And I mean, I think that it works to adapt that into this sci-fi story because that kind of environment, there are absolutely people that learn how to survive properly and people that never make it.
Right. Yeah, I think, the most interesting thing about Dune is that it's really this medieval futurism. So much of it feels futuristic, and yet at the same time, a lot of it feels medieval, with these...
Yeah, like with the houses.
Yeah, the houses feeling castle-like, and the idea that they've really gone back to swords for battle, because the shields that they use on their bodies create this ability of having projectile type weapons being useless. You could use laser guns, laser guns as they call them in the series, but those have a basically an atomic effect against a shield. Nobody wants that because you're basically creating an atomic bomb. So yeah, you've really found a way to kind of bring it back to this this medieval feel, and I think they do such a great job with all of the different planets. Obviously Caladan feeling like the Northwest very much, honestly, lots of rain, ocean, things feeling wet a lot because it's always either raining or cooler there. Gendy Prime, the being the house Harkonnen home, feeling like this place where they've literally mined everything. It almost reminds me of the look of kind of what Zack Snyder was going for in Man of Steel with Krypton, which was that they basically mined the planet to its core. Seleucia, it's fascinating because in the prequel series, Seleucia was actually originally the Imperial headquarters, the Imperium headquarters for the Emperor, and then it's later turned into the planet that you see, which is the prison planet, which is crazy. And then, yeah, I mean, Arrakis is perfect. I mean, they created Dune in every detail that you want, from the sill suits to the way the sandworms work, to the thoppers, to the way the spice you can see in the sky. I mean, just feels amazing. The only thing I would have loved is that, you know, ships in Dune travel through folded space, so they fold space, and so they just pop out one place and pop in another. I actually would have liked to have seen that effect, because I just would love to see how which is also kind of one of the reasons that none of the ships, especially the large ships, don't really seem to have this. There's nothing aerodynamic about them, because they don't need to be aerodynamic, because they're not like flying.
Right.
You know, there's no flying through space. They just pop in and out, which I thought was cool. And then the design work, you know, and yeah, I'll be interested to see. There's some ships are flown by navigators who are basically high on spice all the time. That helps them fly the ships through space to get the fold space from one place to the next. So, yeah, I mean, all of this, the production design here, it has been a long time since I've been in a world with a film which feels complete from start to finish.
And this for you.
Yeah.
It felt like it was true to the books with that.
Oh yeah, in that sense. And I would just ask you, you know, coming in with this, you know, basically being your first time to like see the world of Star Wars, you know, and hopefully, you know, where that, I know you're such a fan, and that ended up feeling it feels like a complete universe. Did Dune feel like that from all the different things that you see, that everything seemed to fit within the universe they had put you in?
Yeah, well, and it's funny to mention Star Wars, because there does feel like a lot of similarity there between Arrakis and Jakku. But yeah, desert planets in Star Wars as well. You know, it feels very old, even though it's technically a futuristic, for us anyway, story. Everything feels very worn and lived in, and, you know, like it's going through this dust all the time. And I like the explanation of how the spice made the Fremen's eyes blue.
Yes.
Because otherwise, you know, I would just be like, why do they have blue eyes?
Yeah. Yes, 100%.
But yeah, it does feel complete. And I think that they did a great job as well. I really wanted to give a shout out with the cinematography in particular.
Gorgeous.
For making everything feel so massive. You know, and seeing it in the theater for the first time, I think is absolutely the way to see it, because they even filmed it specifically with IMAX cameras. They even were saying with the production of some of the desert scenes, to make it feel more expansive, used rather than a green screen, a brown screen.
Yes. Yeah.
So I like that too. So there was a lot of thought behind making this look as in world as possible, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think everything you said there is 100% right on target, you know, and I felt the exact same way in the sense that, you know, they've thought through every single part of this in the same way. I feel like the last time that I felt like this about a film series, really, in the sense of creating a world like this, was in Lord of the Rings, where you would watch the behind-the-scenes extras, and you'd see how those people had thought through every little detail on every single costume, on every single ship, on every single, you know, every single piece of anything that had to do with the movie. They had thought about the reason as to the why and the how of it and how it worked in this universe. And Dune feels like that here. And and that's exactly what you want. And so, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think one of the things that this movie does phenomenally on top of the production design has to be the cast. I don't have a problem with anybody here. Like, I think everybody's perfect. And there's nobody's performance who I didn't love. And part of that has to come with, I mean, Timothée Chalamet is the thing that this movie's shoulders rest on, because if he doesn't work as Paul, you're not going to care about this movie really. And I thought that, I've seen him in quite a few things, but his portrayal here of Paul was nuanced. It was real. He wasn't a whiny teenager. He came off as somebody who obviously is this coming of age story, coming into his own, but at the same time, as he's coming into his own, realizing that he may be a pawn in a larger game, and that his mom has been part of this game. And how does he feel about that? Like, all of that was so well done, and I couldn't be happier with his portrayal. Like, I was surprised at the nuance in every single scene that he's in.
Mm-hmm. And that was my biggest question for you too, was, as a fan of the series as a whole and everything, how did he and his mother, the casting choices of him and Rebecca Ferguson, stack up for you? So I'm glad that you liked him, because otherwise it could have been hard.
Did you like him, especially since he's kind of you're into the story?
Yeah, and that's the other interesting thing. This is actually the first thing I've seen him in. I keep being told I need to see Little Women, but I haven't seen the new version.
Yes, Little Women is fantastic. Yeah. Yes.
And I agree. I think that he did a great job of getting across the seriousness of what's going on. I mean, it's not supposed to be a jokey kind of movie.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that they're going through is on the brink of war. They've found out that they've been given a planet, which, shouldn't make anyone feel warm and fuzzy.
Right.
It's basically saying we gave you a whole planet of people, like they're just, bartering planets. And his family's going, okay. So, yeah, I think that he gets across very well that there's all these different pieces at play, and that he is in the midst of becoming a man. And the scene, honestly, that was my favorite between he and Oscar Isaac as Leto was at the graveyard where they're talking. And it really struck a chord with me when Oscar Isaac says, a leader answers a call, and I hope your answer is yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So
it was just such a moving thing to hear him saying, like, the most important thing you've ever done is be my son. I'm not going to force this life on you, but I hope that you'll choose it.
Yeah. You'll be surprised, but you've seen Interstellar, and he's in Interstellar. Mm-hmm. He plays the younger version of the son.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. So you've seen him once other, I'm sure. But no, I loved that scene. And one of the things that I felt like the entire cast was able to do, which is that they were able to create emotional moments for the short amount of time that you have on screen. I mean, this movie is long, but at the same time, a lot of these people don't survive the story here, even in part one, and therefore you have to create emotional moments with the characters very quickly. And I felt like you said, Timothée Chalamet and Oscar Isaac have fantastic chemistry together to create that father-son relationship that is very special, even just with the small looks that they would give at each other, when the herald comes, and as he, as Leto looks to put his signet on the parchment there, he looks at his son, and his son kind of gives him the nod to go ahead. There's this wonderful emotion of a father who truly loves his son, and I think this is one of the moments where I feel like I just would have liked if they had done that with Jessica and Leto, to let you know that this had happened because of love, and you would understand how important, Paul is to Leto. In that sense, like, this is everything he's ever wanted, is to have this son, to be able to pass things on to. So, no, I agree right there 100%. And, at the same time, Rebecca Ferguson, I'm a huge fan of Rebecca Ferguson, obviously from the Mission Impossible movies. I think she's phenomenal. And I kind of love her in everything that I have seen her in, from, Dr. Sleep to I even enjoyed her in Reminiscence that had just come out recently, Greatest Showman. She's phenomenal. And here, I mean, her portrayal of a mother who has created something that which she knows what he could be, but dealing with the actual ramifications of him possibly becoming that and are terrified and not ready for that to happen, she nails it. Like, because she plays with the emotion on her face so well so many times. I adore her in this movie. Like, she was perfectly cast.
So yes, definitely I felt the same about Rebecca Ferguson. I also loved her in Greatest Showman, and other things as well. I think, she was in Fallout too.
Yeah, I mean, she's about to be in more, Mission Impossible movies. Rogue Nation, she was in, but yeah, she's in the next two that they're doing. So yeah, 100%.
But she just definitely in the scene where, Paul has to go in by himself with the Reverend Mother, and she's standing outside, and you see the dread growing more and more in her body language. I think gets across so well how much she cares for her son, and also knows what's coming and wants to stop it, but feels held back by responsibility or duty to, being a Bene Gesserit. I think that she did an amazing job. I do think that they did well finding two actors that had good chemistry to get across that mother and son bond. And I really also love the scene where she and Paul are having to escape, and they're alone together in the desert under the tent. I think that it was such a, like we've said before, like a character study kind of moment where they're the only thing that you're focusing on. And it was such a heavy scene. So I love her too.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I mean, the way she plays that scene, and again, it's the fear that she has as she watches her son become the thing to which she knew he could be. And she's not quite ready to handle that. And honestly, she doesn't know how to handle it.
Yeah.
In that moment. And it's phenomenal. And yet at the same time, there is this intense sadness that's happening there too, because they've both just lost somebody incredibly important to them. Obviously, Jessica loves Leto, and Paul just lost his father, who we know from the scenes that they've had together, he loves his son, and his son loved his father and looked up to his father. He was an excellent father. Which doesn't happen a lot in sci-fi movies these days.
Right.
Like in general, it's usually a father-daddy issues, and yet Paul doesn't have any of that because he has an incredible father. And so, yeah, I think it's wonderful. And I got to give it to Jason Momoa playing Duncan Idaho, who's a really important character in the entire Dune series. I loved him in this movie, and his relationship with Paul, again, Paul has all of these great male role models, which never happens in movies these days. And yet Paul is surrounded by incredibly good men, like men that you would want to be like. And, Jason Momoa playing Duncan is like, he's like the uncle that everybody wants, right?
Yeah. Oh, 1,000%. And the way that they greet each other whenever they're, it's like there's a long absence, and then they run up and bear hug. I think that, I already love Jason Momoa and everything, but
I mean, yeah, you've been his arms actually. So,
but yeah, he just gets across that, he's like a warrior. And especially in this role too, I really love the scene where he locks the door and defends them, on Arrakis. I think that he does such a great job of being that person who's like, no, I will protect Paul, especially at all costs, because that's what his father would expect of me.
Well, and the beauty of that scene where he meets Jessica and Paul in the desert. You know, he's stolen the Ornithopter, and he's got Kynes with him, and he kneels before them, you know, and saying he's sorry, and then he kisses the ring on Paul's finger and says, you know, my Duke. You know, he as close as him and Paul are, he immediately recognizes him as the authority figure now because of the honor to which this man has. And so as close as they've been, he will always end up being subservient now, you know, at this point to Paul. It's just so great. And so, you know, there's so many great people in the cast. So, you know, we could talk about Josh Brolin. I think he was great with the screen time he gets here. And so many people, but I really wanted to ask you, because obviously very important to this are the villains of the story, the Harkonnens, and specifically Stellan Skarsgård playing the Baron. And what did you think of him as this character?
I could definitely tell it was him, even though it was under a lot of makeup and effects, probably. But you can still see the face shape underneath.
Yeah, and the voice is so distinctive.
Exactly. And he did a great job with this. And I didn't know what to compare it to. Obviously, I had not read the books or seen any of the other movies, but I definitely got across that vibe that he's just like a severe glutton. And so he has this device, I guess, on his back that enables him to levitate from to fro instead of have to walk.
Yeah, because he's too fat to walk anymore.
And then in his free time, he sits in a vat of oil.
Well, for recovery. Okay. I'm not exactly sure, you know, how that helps you recover, but apparently it helps him recover.
He's just got to, you know, soak for a little bit. But yeah, he was fantastic. He definitely brought across that sinister feeling. And I think that, you know, they show how even just the lead up to meeting him for the first time. I like that they have, who was it? Someone in House Atreides, I think. Maybe it was Duncan that even says the Harkonnen aren't going to just release this planet to us.
Oh yeah, that's Gurney.
Josh Brolin.
Yeah. Talking to Paul about how brutal they are.
They ruled Arrakis for 80 years. Yeah, they consider that planet theirs. So, yeah.
No, I 100% agree with you. I think he's fantastic. I think he's so good at these type of roles. And, you know, having just talked on Assembling Avengers with John about Thor, and you know he's in that movie, and he can be so lovable and likable, and he can also just turn on a dime and be horrendously terrible in a film. And he's so versatile as an actor, and so I think he's wonderful in this role. And you know, again, there isn't anybody in this movie that I don't think gives a good performance with the time that they have on screen, and does a great job of taking the character and immediately kind of helping you know who this character is. And so you'll forgive us if we don't talk about every single person, because we don't have that kind of time with the amount of people that are in this movie, but I think it's phenomenal. And I think you were just mentioning this about the Baron, and I think this is a good place to kind of jump into this idea that I really saw in the movie that I loved, the kind of the thematic element of exploitation versus cooperation, and how House Harkonnen it only looks how to exploit things for profit, whereas on the other side you have House Atreides, who sees the wisdom in partnering for mutual benefit. And in many ways it did remind me of The Phantom Menace, and how Obi-Wan refers to this idea of symbiosis. What you do to one happens to the other. And the Harkonnens don't care about that as long as it's lining their pocketbooks, you know. And whereas the Atreides, you see them looking to create a better world, not only for themselves, but others as well. And in fact, the definition of creating a better world for themselves is creating one that's beneficial for all involved. And, you know, Leto saying to Stiglar, hey, I've been given this planet, but I have no wish to be to take over your sieges. You will never be hunted, but I still have to steward what I've been given, and therefore I can't promise not to, have to come into the desert. But if you treat me with honor, I will treat you with honor. And I thought those two things, we really see that at play here in the film very well.
Right. And it feels like they genuinely recognize, the House Atreides, that they don't know everything, and that the people that know Arrakis best and can help grow their knowledge of how to live there and thrive there are the Fremen, and that they have to partner together in order for mutual survival, because the Fremen aren't able to use the spice on their own to then trade with other houses and people off world. They still need someone to help them so that they've got any kind of trade going on, right?
Yeah.
So it does feel like they need someone to come and help them, not just people to come and rule them, though.
And I mean, it's fascinating because obviously there is a huge history to the planet of Arrakis and the Fremen and everything that goes along there. But I think what's beautiful here is that you could see that for a lifetime, if not more, the Fremen have not been used to anybody treating them with any kind of honor or respect. Right. And Leto comes in completely differently, and Paul has bought into this idea as well. And so, the idea of whether we just exploit people or we learn to cooperate, and it's this idea of power dynamics, right? That it's not just about having absolute power, because that still doesn't actually do what's best for you. To have absolute power without the cooperation of those around you. And I think they do a really great job of portraying that in the movie. And then on part of that it's a famous quote from the book about fear and how fear is the mind killer. And what I loved about this is that we really do see in this movie how fear is driving everything, especially in the idea of like tribe against tribe and house against house, in this disunity that causes the chaos here. The Emperor knows that if he can keep all the great houses fighting against one another, he's not going to be threatened. And so the idea is to keep the fear level high between the houses so they act out of fear instead of, brains, which is exactly the difference we were talking about earlier with exploitation and cooperation. House Atreides longs to change that dynamic, to not act out of fear, but act out of what's best not only for them, for those around him. And I thought that was, that's one theme that probably could have been a little bit stronger in the movie, especially because this quote is so famous from this book. And so important to this book in general, but I still think it plays out pretty well.
Yeah, I would say I think that that's the biggest theme I feel throughout this movie, is that they're showing fear in all aspects of the story. They have Paul having fear of what's to come and whether or not he's ready and capable to face it. They have fear with his mother, of seeing him growing up and having to be thrust out into possibly becoming the Duke and not being ready, or she's not ready for him to grow up. And then, like you were saying, between all of the tribes, so that basically the Emperor has control over everyone, and the Emperor is exploiting the houses, and then the houses are exploiting the others. So, yeah, I mean, I think that they did use it well and in a lot of different ways. But I liked especially where it was used with Paul and his mother in the Thopter, I think you said it was called.
Mm-hmm. The Omnithopter,
yeah. In the storm.
Yes.
Where it's not just talking about fear anymore, but also kind of combining it with this religious feel on their part of sort of the let go and let God kind of thing.
Yeah.
That there's just
and very much
total
so.
trust that he has of, I'm doing the right thing in this situation. And it works out in his favor, but he doesn't necessarily know. He has to take that leap of faith, and that has fear with it.
Yes. And in some ways that goes the whole idea of cooperation, but cooperating with the flow of nature and the way things work, which is a huge theme, obviously, in the book. This idea of technology over nature and lots of those type of things get played out in the Dune series for sure. So 100%. One of the big things about the film is the score. Hans Zimmer, he opted not to do Tenet for this. He's worked with Christopher Nolan a lot, but he decided to do this, and
because he loved the book.
This score, yeah. So what did you think of this score? Because this is one of those scores to which is so integral to the movie itself.
Oh, man. If this score was bad, it would have made the movie worse. I think, sorry, not worse. I'm using the wrong word. It would have made the movie tainted. It wouldn't have, ruined the movie, but it's such another part of the movie, like another character. It feels to me the same way that the music was done for Black Panther. It's this very tribal sounding, lots of different rhythms and things that, they even said that Hans Zimmer created new sounds. He went out into the desert in Utah to try and get a real feel for natural sounds to incorporate into the score. And it wasn't, him alone. He also worked with a 32-person choir, apparently, that he conducted via Zoom in different parts and from a remote studio. That alone is really cool to me. But yeah, it feels like this cool mix of, like I said, like tribal sounds, natural desert, like sounds of wind over sand kind of thing, as well as that mix in of very soft choir voices here and there. And I loved that.
It's one of those scores to which is like you said, it is another character in the movie, and to create these different sounds and everything, it's just incredible work. Obviously, Hans really wanted to make this something that felt unique and special to Dune, and it didn't just feel like anything else. And I think that's really cool and commendable. And it's, I've been listening to the soundtrack. It's been out for weeks now, and I've been listening to it, and I really enjoy listening to it, especially as I'm reading, Dune books. And of course, he released not only the Dune soundtrack, but they also did the Art and Soul of Dune, which goes along with the making of book that I read, as well as the Dune sketchbook, which is basically just longer and more extended versions of like ideas basically that he had for these different segments of the movie, kind of played out in different ways. But in all honesty, the thing I really want is I just want a complete score for the film, because I love the way that the music plays out in the movie. I think it's really cool, and I really enjoy it, and I think it is something. I mean, it stands apart, and it makes sense because, Hans Zimmer also did the same thing for his Blade Runner 2049, which is to create this audio character to which helped extrapolate your feeling of being in this place and this time. And he was going for the exact same feeling in Dune, and I think he really nails it. Something I did want to ask you honestly before we got to our ratings was, this is a really big effects-heavy film, and so how do you feel like that works? Was there anything that you questioned in the movie, or what did you think about how the effects here for Dune work for you?
I think that for something that had to have effects in some major areas, it didn't feel heavy on effects. Everything felt natural and felt that it was so well done, or at least figured out how to tweak it to make it look more natural. It helped a lot. I think that the biggest thing that they did that turned out very well with the effects was the sandworms, because every time that the mouth actually opens up and you really get a good look at it, it's not just like a little glimpse. It's like extremely detailed, feels larger than life the way it should. And then they even did a good job of showing how they move, but not being able to show much at that point. Or when they show at just one point a glimpse of one of the Fremen riding one, because you've already seen a sandworm not underground, you're going, geez, that guy's awesome. Or girl, And so I think that where they did use the effects, like I said, I think it comes across so well that you don't go, ugh, that's bad effects, or, oh, that's really noticeable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think this is one of those movies where the effects are just perfect. They've worked very hard to make sure that you are not pulled out of this movie effects-wise, that you feel immersed in every single scene, and that means that every single effect needs to feel perfect. And I think you're absolutely right in calling out that you need to make the sandworms, especially once you see them, feel real, feel immensely powerful and crazy awesome, and just everything that, of course, fans have been wanting to see. And yeah, for you, obviously, the surprise of seeing that somebody can ride a sandworm leaves a lot for, part two, and you're like, oh, I can't wait to see that, we obviously saw Dr. Kynes looking to mount one and ride one, but we didn't get to see her do it because she dies before that. And so then realizing that's exactly what she was planning to do, I'm sure is pretty cool for you. But I couldn't believe what I was seeing in some ways, in the sense that, again, and I've been saying this the whole show, but it's just been so long since I've felt this immersed in a world that felt so real. And in all honesty, I really do think that the last time that happened was either Lord of the Rings, or I felt that way about his Blade Runner 2049. He's so good at making sure that you feel immersed in the world that you're in the movies that he creates. And I cannot wait for part two. But before we get to part two, Christy, what would you rate Dune Part 1?
So I didn't have to think about that too much, because I have to say, even on just the one viewing I've had, I definitely want to have more of them. I felt that it was, like I said, something that, for especially the cinematography, the plot simplification, and the score, was enthralling for me. And especially for my first experience ever with Dune, was a good one. So I have to rate it 4.5 out of 5 sandworms, because dang, like I left feeling like, where you've seen a movie that you feel like was just profound, and the rest of your day, you're just like kind of mulling it over. It felt like that kind of movie.
Yeah.
Like I left and I felt different than when I went in. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's almost a perfect movie. I think that, maybe there are one or two things I would add, but not much. And I did want to, since you mentioned Dr. Kynes, I wanted to give a shout out to Sharon Duncan Brewster, because we've seen her in other things. And I think that here, especially, she did such a great job with the limited time she had on screen. And I don't know if you knew this, Matt, but this movie is kind of a who's who of Rogue One, because she was in Rogue One, and the cinematographer, Greg Fraser, was the cinematographer for Rogue One. So speaking of Star Wars, here we are.
Yeah. And I mean, like Rogue One, the cinematography here is wonderful. When you finally read the book for Dune, you'll realize that Dr. Kynes has actually been gender swapped. I feel like that worked here. And, look, for my quibbles about the minor things that I had to say about this movie that I would have changed, would have liked to have seen, part of that just comes from the immense knowledge of Dune in the books. And obviously, when you're trying to adapt anything this big, you're always going to have that. I love the Lord of the Rings movies. They're not perfect, and there are things that I kind of wish were done differently in some of them, but that doesn't mean I don't absolutely love them as films. And this movie is a masterpiece. I mean, it just is to me. And I will give this 5 out of 5 Chris knives, because I think this is everything as a fan I wanted from Dune. And again, I mean, because I'm a fan, I can also have quibbles about it, but I loved that somebody brought my imagination to life like this after reading so many Dune books, and I absolutely can't wait for part 2. So, Christy, I guess before we get to recommendations, I have one question: is when are you going to read Dune?
I haven't been reading anything lately, so maybe the next time I read a book.
Maybe audiobook.
Oh yeah, good point. Or at least book on my iBooks. I've been reading a lot of books that way too.
Yeah, there you go. So, well, it is that time of the show where we get to recommendations. So, Christy, what do you want to recommend to the listeners of the 602 Club today?
So I'm excited about today's recommendation because this movie reminded me of seeing those commercials for the series back when I watched the Sci-Fi Channel on TV all the time. And my husband and I are a little bit different in that aspect. I love old sci-fi, and he likes a little bit more fantasy stuff and leans more, with Star Wars and things like that. But Dune was right up my alley. And the stuff that I want to recommend is all stuff that was popular in 90s Sci-Fi Channel era. So I recommend checking out a few different things from that era if people have the ability to stream them. Original Mystery Science Theater 3000. That was my main thing. I also used to watch a ton of Stargate SG-1, Xena Warrior Princess, Hercules.
There you go.
Sliders, Quantum Leap, The Outer Limits, all of that. That was my bread and butter. I watched it like every day when I got home from school. So yeah, if you have the ability to check out, just look up Sci-Fi Channel shows from the 90s. But all of them are good. But I think the one that's kind of fun that may be hard to find, but if you can check out Quantum Leap, that one was really fun.
Yeah. Yep. Scott Bakula.
Yep. That's how I originally saw him, and he has come to Dragon Con before.
Yeah.
And it's about time travel. I mean, come on.
Can you ask for more?
Yeah.
Well, this week, it's hard because there's so many things that I do want to recommend to people. But I'm going to recommend, I just picked this up, and I am working my way through it. It's the James Bond Archives by Paul Duncan. and it is a massive book about all of the James Bond films, and it doesn't just cover the Eon predictions, it also covers the parody film that was done with David Niven, the Casino Royale, first Casino Royale, as well as Never Say Never Again, all the way through. This new edition covers all the way through No Time to Die. And actually, I'll be interviewing him for the 602 Club here coming up in November. So I'm encouraging you to pick this up. Now, it is a more expensive book, but I have both of his Star Wars Archives book, the original trilogy and the prequel edition. I cannot more highly recommend books. And so as I'm working my way for this James Bond Archives book, it is also living up to those. And so I highly recommend picking that up when you can, because it's awesome. But Christy, if everybody wants to catch up with you, because I know they do, where can they find you?
You can find me talking about more old sci-fi stuff and, all kinds of other things on Instagram and Twitter at Bespin Bell. And then I also hang out in the Babel conference sometimes. And I have a show I do with my friends Amanda and Teresa called Sabers and Spells on the Skywalking Through Neverland Network, where we talk about sci-fi and geek things we don't usually get to cover. And we are covering Labyrinth currently. So stay tuned for that.
And you could find me all over social media under the name Matt Rushing02. So any of the major social media platforms, you can find me, even Letterboxd. You can also find me here on the network doing a bunch of shows. Of course, in the 602 Club feed, you'll find Snyder Cut, as well as Assembling Avengers with John Mills. You'll also find me doing Warp 5, The Orb, and Literary Treks. Of course, Warp 5 is about Star Trek Enterprise. The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek. And then over at the Nerd Party Network, I did a show with Drea Kaufman called Owl Post. It was about Harry Potter. And that's a finished show now. We covered every single chapter in that series, one chapter at a time. And then last but not least, John Mills and I talk about Star Wars every week on Aggressive Negotiations. But thank you so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?